Simon Hosford, welcome to Australian Musician.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're talking to you because Simon Hosford's Fair Warning is playing at the Melbourne Guitar Show on August the 3rd.
That's right, August the 3rd, Saturday at about 4 p.m.
And you're playing the entire Van Halen debut album live.
That's right, where essentially you can think of it like dropping the needle on the vinyl on side one and continuing to side two, and we're just going to play the album from the start to the finish, just like you were sitting listening to the record.
When did you hear that album for the first time?
That's a good question. I heard that record, I think, I was about 12 years old, and my guitar teacher at the time had a lot of students, and so what he would do is if his students came to me with anything interesting, he'd just pass it on to me straight away. So one of his students gave him a Van Halen compilation cassette, and so Van Halen 1 wasn't on that in its entirety, but it was, it was mixed up on there, and that was the first time I'd ever heard that. And that, of course, I was playing classical guitar up to that point, and I was like, I want to do that.
The album is now 41 years old. Do you reckon it's stood the test of time?
Yeah, I do. I really do. And me and the boys who have been going through it with a fine-tooth comb and picking apart the bits have really found, we've all loved the record, so that was no surprise to us. And we've loved the songs and, of course, the virtuosic playing. But we're really surprised how much how it almost sounds fresh now. You know, everything old is new again and all of that. But it sounds really fresh to us.
The original demos of the album were financed by Gene Simmons.
That's right.
Of Kiss. The album was recorded as a band, all in one hit.
Yeah.
What other little quirky trivia bits have you learned about the album?
That's a really good question. Trivia bits. Well, actually, one of the things that I've learned that was really interesting was that there's so many songs on the subsequent records that we didn't even realize were written for the first record and just didn't make it on because they already had too many songs. So there's songs like House of Pain that's on the 1984 record that was written for the first album, and a whole bunch of other stuff as well that was on Van Halen 2 and Women and Children First that was written for that record. So that was really interesting to then know that and then go, right, it actually sounds like it could have gone on that record when you know it, you know.
One of the highlights of the album is the track Eruption, which really introduced Eddie Van Halen and his tapping style to the world and virtually changed guitar playing forever. I guess that had an impact on you, that track?
Oh yeah, all of it really, but Eruption of course particularly as well. And I have to say that, I obviously tried to learn that furiously when I was 12, 13 years old and first heard it. I was like, okay, whatever that is, I've got to figure it out. And I totally did not have the chops then to really tackle it properly, but obviously over the years you just keep digging away at it. And I have to say that if I'm not thinking about the nuances in it and that I have to play it and which finger goes where and all of that stuff, and I just listen to it as a piece of music, that if that had never been recorded and a guitarist came out with a record with that on it now, I think it would really sound just as amazing.
That track gets a lot of credit, as does You Really Got Me, which was a big single. But there are so many other classic riffs on the album, aren't there?
There is. I have to say, and it's on the face of it, it's probably not the rockiest song. In fact, if anything, it has like a bit of an old 50s kind of doo-wop kind of flavor to it, and that's Feel Your Love Tonight. And I have to say, for me, that's a guilty pleasure. It's one of my favorite songs to play. I like them all, but that one particularly makes me happy. I know it sounds nerdy, but it's a fun song to play.
You could have chosen a number of Van Halen albums to play, and pay tribute to. Why this one?
To be honest, it's a belated 40th anniversary idea. 40th anniversary, of course, being from the release in 1978, which I think was in February sometime. I can't remember the exact date, but I think it was in early Feb 1978. And so at that time, I guess it was a year or so ago now, was when the idea was like, wow, that would be a cool show to just do a tribute to the 40th anniversary of what for me and probably for a lot of guitarists really changed them and shaped sort of rock guitar history. So it's a belated anniversary.
Tell me about the guys in the band.
Well, speaking of anniversaries, it's also the 20th anniversary for myself and Jerry Pantazis, who's playing drums. We put Fair Warning together 20 years ago, actually not even with the aid of doing a gig, or with the aim of doing a gig, I should say. We put it together just because we wanted to play the music, that was all. So every 2 weeks for a whole year, we just would pick another 2 songs and we'd get together at a rehearsal studio and jam. And we ended up doing 1 show out of rehearsing for a whole year. But of course, like I said, we weren't doing it for that. We were doing it for us because we felt like we were making a living as musicians, working for everybody else all the time. We wanted to get back to that feeling of when you're a kid and just listening and learning, and so we did that. So Jerry Pantazis on drums, and me and him celebrating our Fair Warning 20th anniversary. We have Jason Vorher laying down the bottom line on bass, who's excellent, and on backing vocals as well, of course, a la Michael Anthony. And the one and the only Eugene Hamilton is going to be fronting it. And he's as much Diamond Dave as anyone I know in this city. So I think people are going to be in for a treat. So we're trying to do the music as close as we can to note for note and sound as well. And Eugene Hamilton will be bringing the vibe of David Lee Roth as close as he can. So I think it'll be fun.
How did you go about approaching your gear for this gig, and just how nerdy did you get?
Well, that's a rabbit hole that is, or a bottomless pit that never seems to end with the gear. There's lots of different approaches, and I'm actually still in the middle of toying with a couple. I'm sort of auditioning different things. Now, the obvious one is to just be true to how it was done. So that's an old 1969 Marshall Plexi, an Echoplex tape machine, and an MXR Phase 90, the orange one, which is that classic sound of all those Eddie solos on that first record. And I do have my classic Marshall Plexi. It's not a 1969, but it is heavily modified as much back to 69 as possible by the fantastic Warwick Newman. And then I also do have the Phase 90 and all the other bits and pieces. But I'm finding what I want to do as I'm getting nerdier and nerdier with it is I want almost every song to sound the way it does on the record. And that's sort of, I've been getting my guilty pleasure out of trying to do that, which at the guitar show is going to be tricky because it would just involve too many guitar changes and too many changes with the amp settings and stuff. So one option I'm looking at there, the Kemper, which is a profiling amp that some of you may know, has some great profiles of old 1968 and 69 Marshalls, even with the old Variac that Eddie used to use to turn the input voltage down to 90 volts from 110. And some of the profiles in there actually have that. So I've started that as a bass, and I'm thinking maybe I could use that as a preamp and run it into the power amp of my Marshall Plexi and sort of half and half it. So I get the flexibility of the preamp being sort of digital and changing settings, and then the rest of it being, vintage speakers and a Marshall power amp.
That's one of the things about Eddie that many people don't sort of think about. Not only was he a fabulous guitarist, but he was quite the innovator too. That whole sound was quite complex, wasn't it?
It was, and no one sounded like him too, and which is quite amazing because these days, of course, there's so many different bits of gear that you can buy. I mean, obviously there's the traditional sort of retro now, almost like the real tube amp kind of thing and pedals on the floor, but there's so many virtual things now too. There's the Axe-Fx and all these other different things that are digital sort of remakes of all the old amps. So with everything that's out there, it's amazing to me that back then everyone was using the same gear. You're either using a Fender amp or a Marshall amp, and you're using a Strat or you're using a Les Paul, that kind of thing. Obviously, there was a few more in the mix, but essentially that was it. And some pedals, some wah-wah and a Phase 90 and some distortion pedals. And yet, with the same gear, everyone sounded so different. And so that was the magic. I think it was really what was in Eddie's head, and his heart was came out of him,
Eddie's tone has come to be known as, or the earlier tone, come to be known as the Brown sound. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, I can. And actually that's an interesting story because Eddie's sound was known as the Brown sound because his guitar was always very overdriven, and a lot of people's sounds that were very distorted and high gain at that time also sounded very aggressive and cutting, you know. Eddie sort of didn't. Somehow he managed a combination of things, and obviously it's in his fingers as well, a combination that even though he had a high gain sound and what I believe, obviously I've never heard it in the flesh, but like incredibly high volume, because the only way you could get that sound was by turning everything on 10. It was not like now where you just turn the preamp gain up and leave the master down nice and low. So his combination enabled him to have that high gain aggressive sound and yet be listenable and be warm and kind of rounded. Although the appendix to that story, I believe, I'm happy to be corrected if anyone knows that I'm wrong, but I believe it to be true, is that it started from Alex Van Halen's snare drum being called Brown. And then, obviously, as they were playing together, they became sort of known as the brothers that had the Brown sound.
And for the Melbourne Guitar Show, what will be your Franken Strat?
Haha. Well, I'm going to have several axes because I need to do a few different things. But my Franken Strat is actually a Fender Strat, white as well, of course, like the Strat pictured on the first record. That I have some custom Seymour Duncans on their way, swimming their way across the water at the moment to get to Australia to put into there. And one of them is Seymour's Frankenstein humbucker pickup, which of course, as you would imagine, is the same exact specs that he wound for the Franken Strat. So it'll have the correct pickups, all of that, maple neck, and I don't think I'm going to have time to give it the full striped respray, but it will have the full Bunnings electrical tape stripes.
The track Running with the Devil starts with the band's actual car horns.
That's right.
Will we be hearing car horns at the guitar show?
Look, I'd love to think that we could organise a thing where everyone could go out to the car park and hit their car horns, but failing that, we will actually be starting the gig with the correct sample of that record, of the car horns, which apparently they recorded with all the cars pointed in at each other at one Omni mic in their car park of the recording studio.
Yourself and James Ryan are no strangers to the Melbourne Guitar Show. You did the Racer X tribute.
That's right.
And now you're doing the Van Halen show. What other classic albums might we see you dragging out one day?
That's a very good question. Look, the Racer X thing again came about simply because it was something that I grew up with. So that was a guilty indulgence, as is the Van Halen 1 record, really. So I have to say there isn't one that's like sitting right there just waiting to burst through the doors. But there will be. There will be something that will occur to me for sure. That will, come from, I guess, something that was influential. So yeah, I'm not sure at this point.
You have played the Melbourne Guitar Show many times. What do you like about the guitar show?
The Melbourne Guitar Show is actually one of my favourite guitar shows that I've been to in the world. And one of the reasons, there's many, but firstly is the accessibility of everything. There's so many great different areas. Nothing's off limits. All the wonderful equipment, of course, that goes without saying. And who doesn't like nerding out on all the gear and the new axes and the new amps and like I was saying before, we live in a world at the moment where it just seems like there's some new cool thing coming out every 2 months. So the guitar show is just a great way for people that are busy, and I'm one of those people a lot of the time. I don't have time to be reading all the magazines and stuff and checking out every day what the new thing is. So the guitar show is this great kind of hub, this mecca of new gear. Of course, so many great different guitarists of different styles that I admire and love, and that either don't live in Melbourne, so you don't get to hear them much, or you always seem to be working when they're doing a gig, and so you can see all these incredible musicians all in one spot. So I think the Melbourne Guitar Show is unique in that, and I enjoy it every time. It's fantastic.
So why should punters come down and see Simon Hosford's Fair Warning?
Well, Of course, I'm only one of all the things that's going to be happening on that weekend, but if you're a fan especially of Van Halen, and especially David Lee Roth era Van Halen, the early stuff, all I can say is that the rehearsals are sounding good, so we're not too scared, but we're going to be doing this as note for note to the record as for people that aren't them could do. So, you know, it's either going to be incredible and you can come and see that and that would be cool, or it's going to be at the very least interesting if it doesn't go right and you can come and have a laugh with us. But we're going to be having some fun for sure, and I don't think there'll be anyone laughing. Hopefully it's going to be a lot of fun.
Simon Hosford, thanks for your time.
A pleasure. Thank you.